Now, India, being the second largest populated country in the world, definitely has got a very big advantage. He is able to get job, he is able to grow further, and he is able to find an identity for himself. Urban cities are definitely considered to be the employment hubs which have been providing jobs on a regular basis. India is definitely a country that has produced entrepreneurs, that has pushed entrepreneurs, and that has always stood as an ideal example. Good morning and welcome to the second session of Chapter 7, Employment and Growth. In the previous session, we were talking about the various factors of work and employment. We were actually trying to look into the importance of employment that contributes towards the nation development and to the national income. In this session, we are going to see about the worker participation and how does it really matter in terms of contributing towards the national income. So moving forward, these are the topics that we are going to see: participation of people in employment, self-employed and hired workers. So two important topics. They are short topics, but yet they are important because we are going to understand the levels of participation and especially on a very important sector known as the self-employed sector. So let's have a quick dive into this session. Now, the participation of people in employment. Worker population ratio is one important ratio which I would like to talk about in economics because that actually judges the economy of a country. So today, if you start understanding the worker population ratio, you will be surprised to see the total number of people who are actually working and who are not, which means to say that in a given population base of 138 crores in India, how many people are actually working? So that's where we get into the worker population ratio, which is a very important indicator in employment situation. This ratio is very useful, knowing the proportion of population that is actively contributing to the production of the country in terms of the economic activities. So today, when you talk about a country with 138 crore people and you say that only about 90 to 100 crore people are employed, that gives a very serious impression on the factor that still about 20% of India is not employed. That means the unemployment level in India seriously needs to be looked into, and those people also need to start participating in contributing towards the national income and growth. So at every single point, every ratio that has been spoken about in economics has got a direct implication or indication towards the economy altogether. That's why if the ratio is higher, it means that the engagement of people is also greater. One of the most important aspects that we need to understand here is that the more and more you are able to engage people in employment level, that will be really great. Why? Because you will be able to contribute better, you will be able to grow better, and you will be able to go back and tell to other world, to the other nations altogether that your country is highly productive in nature. Now, the ratio for a country is medium. That means we need to see that somewhere we need to adjust, we need to come back. And if the proportion is low, that means we have to increase the active employment in a country. So this worker population, the participative nature, all these matters to the development of the economy in the long run. Now, moving forward, participation of people in employment will also talk about the population factor itself, the total number of people living in your country. Now, India, being the second largest populated country in the world, definitely has got a very big advantage, what some of the most advanced nations do not have. And that is called as the intellectual capital or the human capital all about. In a country like India, just imagine for a while, there are more than 750 universities and there are several colleges that are available in India today. There are several higher order institutions which impart education to the millions of youngsters in our country. So we are one among those nations who generate millions and millions of youngsters with active mind who are ready to transform the nation and take it forward. In other countries, the biggest problem is that they do not have youngsters to this level that can be ever thought about or that can be ever determined. So just to give you an example, 50% of India's population is typically people who are under the age of 30 or 35, which means to say that we have got one of the most active population in the world. And our ratios in terms of mortality, in terms of growth has also been fantastic in the coming years. So that is why when we talk about this population, that is a direct indicator to your nation stating that you have all the rights, you have all the benefits of taking the stage forward and making this country even more greater. So one thing that we need to understand here, one thing that we need to drive home is that the more you are able to generate employment into the country, automatically you are able to actively involve the population into a productive activity. And once the production starts, it directly impacts on the national income, which in turn improves your GDP and your living condition altogether. So that's why people in rural areas have limited resources. This is one thing where India is lacking, and we need to bring that rural population to the front. Moment we start giving them better opportunities, moment we start making them feel important like the urban population, automatically our employment levels will go up, active participation will go up, and we will be able to come forward. So many do not go to schools. This is one thing which I would always like to talk about. The dropout ratio, schools, colleges, and training institutes, they have been fighting really hard in the rural sector where they want people to send their children to school. They want them to get qualified and educated at some point of time. In India, biggest problem is that we don't still get that fluctuation in terms of growth, in terms of the driving factor altogether. So somewhere down the lane, we need to look into this factor that the education and employment levels have to go up at all levels possible. Now, moving forward, even if some of them tend to go, they discontinue in the middle of the school to join a workforce in urban area. This is a very, very critical problem because somewhere down the lane in India, we have felt that the need for earning is more important rather than the need for learning. We need to understand these words very, very clearly. Earning takes a higher seat when compared to learning. So that is where India loses out on the intellectual capacity, on the intellectual workforce altogether. So this is the right time for India to focus, India to make a statement that we need to go back to schools. We need to go back to that trained, skilled workforce academies so that we are able to produce better human capital who can actively participate in the development of the economy. And this matters a lot. That is why if you see that the national education policy which has been recently formed has been made even more flexible, where you can go about, choose your own kind of curriculum and course, develop yourself into a better contributor for the national development altogether. Now, the urban people, on the other hand, definitely have got better choices, a variety of choice when compared to the rural people. And that's probably one of the reasons, if you see in the economy, the rural people tend to migrate to urban city and they will again start moving up the ladder altogether. So this is somewhere you see that there is a frictional factor that's happening between the urban and the rural population. Now, the other thing that we need to see here is that they look for appropriate job and suit their qualifications and skills. That is very, very important. For an engineer, if he is not able to get an engineering job, automatically he tries to move himself out of that sector and starts looking at opportunities in a different sector. But what leads in the long run is a severe depression. Why? Because you are not able to get a right job for your qualification. And in that case, the rural sector is a definite example for you. Many people in the rural sector give up farming, give up agriculture, give up their native skills. The reason being is that that is not the right kind of job they are looking for. They are not satisfied by what they are doing. So they tend to migrate to urban cities and try to find out jobs which are reasonable and suitable for them. Now, this is why it is very, very important for all of us to understand this segment altogether, the need for urbanization in the rural sectors, and we need to build better infrastructure and educational facility, educate the people, make them more skillful, make them more knowledgeable, and participate them in the employment process, which will in turn help us to grow the economy to greater levels as far as possible. Now, moving forward, the self-employed and the hired worker, two important aspects and concepts in terms of our economy. By knowing the status with which a worker is placed in an enterprise, it might be possible to know one dimension, the quality of employment in a country. This is very, very important. Why? Because way back 15-20 years, India was considered to be a blooming country, a budding country, which was coming up in a very big manner in the services sector, especially in the IT and IT-enabled services. Every single country in the world looked at India as the most capable nation that could produce some of the most strongest intellectual force in the world. And no doubts to that statement, 20 years from now, we are the nation, one of the single largest contributor in terms of software development. You might have probably seen in every big city of India, every single multinational company have established their office. It is not only in the services sector, I would also proudly say in the sectors of manufacturing, chemical, defense, or probably even in banking and financial sector, India has excelled above the par. So which means to say that our country is actually now coming on to a dimension where we have seen that the social status of a person has been continuously increasing because of the factor that he is able to get job, he is able to grow further, and he is able to find an identity for himself in the country. So that is where this is coming up to a great extent altogether. Similarly, it also enables us to know the attachment of a worker with him, with the job and the authority he or she has over the entire enterprise and co-workers. Sometime down the lane, in India, we were talking about the best companies, and Indian companies did not figure out much 20 years back. 20 years from that day, that is today, if you start looking into it, there are several Indian enterprises who have created a benchmark in terms of working practices, who have created a benchmark in terms of ethics, values, and principles, and stood out as the best human resources practices in the world. So this is where you would see that the attachment the company has created with the employee. Now the employees are getting involved with the company. Employees are treating their persons as the way how they have to develop. They are giving them more benefits. They are giving them more allowances. So the evolvement of job and participation has started going up to a great extent altogether. Workers who own and operate. Now I'm going to shift myself from a working class to that of a owning class. So I'm going to go from a worker to an entrepreneur, person who runs his own business and he's trying to earn their own livelihood are those people whom we are going to talk about. So in a short word, I'm going to use them as self-employed. Thus, for example, when you look into this sector altogether, more than half of the workforce in India belongs to this category. So definitely, India is one of those countries which has a strong root in the entrepreneurial journey. India is definitely a country that has produced entrepreneurs, that has pushed entrepreneurs, and that has always stood as an ideal example for entrepreneurship background. Today in India, there are several young entrepreneurs who have come up with apps, who have come up with digital technologies, who have come up with several new innovations, ideas, which has been making our country move leaps ahead in terms of the economic outgrowth. Now, moving forward, the construction workers, we are going to talk about this segment, very, very important. Why? Because they are known as casual wage laborers and they account for 33% of India's workforce. when we were talking about a pandemic situation in India, this was the sector that got very, very badly hit. The migrant laborers who were directly dependent on the construction sector, who had moved out from the rural sector, came to the urban cities looking out for an earning, looking out for a living, were directly affected because all those construction companies had to shut down. But then on the positive side, today when things are picking up, things are moving back, construction sector is one of the largest employer, and that constitutes 33% of the workers altogether. So it is directly dependent on human resources, and a lot of people find job in construction sector either in a direct or in a contractual manner. The nature of work in urban areas is different. Obviously, yes. Why? Because we are talking about those big industries, factories, shops, restaurants, service centers, and so many factors, so which the urban cities provide a different atmosphere for working, different environment altogether. Moreover, enterprises in urban areas require workers on a regular basis, so which means to say that the urban cities are more promising than the rural places, and they always make you understand on this factor that urban cities will definitely stand back, will be there in terms of providing job for the people. So somewhere down the lane, we have worked a lot on the urbanization. We have promoted the urban cities to such a great extent that every single person wants to be a part of this urbanization drive. Every single person wants to be a part of the employment situation altogether. So that's why urban cities are definitely considered to be the employment hubs which have been providing jobs on a regular basis. Moving forward, with this, we come to the conclusion for today's session. I hope and believe that this session was interesting, informative, and educative. In the next session, we shall be seeing about the different factors of work and employment. Until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today.